Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here with me this morning. I know it's really busy schedule, so there's no need for a lot of cortisol reasons, so really happy that we're all here. As you can see, my name is Michelle, and I am the founder of Clever Carbon. We teach people about carbon for creative, really fun way. I'm also the co-founder of Keynote. Any climate people in the audience here? I know we have at least one. And if we, yeah. So I wanted to talk to everyone about carbon footprint and look at brief history, because sometimes when we're looking at climate, we're sitting at our desks, we're looking at minutia, we're kind of like reading the same topics. But today, what I would love is for us to take a step back and kind of look at the bigger picture together so we have a better understanding of what we're dealing with. So many of you may know, but we've been on this planet for over 4.5 billion years. And just for context, our universe is about 14 billion years old, and humanity has been around for about 300,000 years, so not a very long time. But for the entire time, almost 80+% of the time on our planet, we have had an inhospitable planet. Volcano eruptions, toxic gases, no oxygen, no water, no life on Earth, hot, very hot. And for many of this time, we had CO2 concentrations over 10,000 parts per billion in our atmosphere. And just for reference, today we're at 421 parts per billion. So let's start here. Now, starting with the Precambrian era, this lasted for about 4 billion years. As I mentioned, the planet was inhospitable, there was no life. But as our planet started to cool, water vapor in the atmosphere condensed, and we started having our first oceans. We had our single-cell organisms, and during this time, we had CO2 levels of about 100,000 parts per million, but as low as 1,000 parts per million. And again, this era lasted for about 4 billion years, which is almost over 80% of our time on this planet. Next, we have the Paleozoic era. This time on Earth was marked by abundant animal and plant life. It was a completely different time from the Precambrian era, and during this time, we had CO2 levels between 7,000 parts per million and 800 parts per million. So kind of see that gap, that range there. And this lasted for about 300 million years. Now next, we have the Mesozoic era, and this era contained the age of the dinosaurs, and it also marked the early development of mammals, flowering plants, and during this time, CO2 levels were at a high of 2,500 parts per million at a low of 500 parts per million. Again, note that gap there. And this lasted for about 180 million years. Next, we have the Cenozoic era. This is the era of mammals. We saw really mammals thriving. We saw 4 glacial periods during this time and early human evolution. And during this time, our CO2 levels were at a high of around 2,000 parts per million and at a low of around 180 parts per million. And that's where we see a lot of the glacial periods. That's why the CO2 concentration is very low. Now, we're in the Holocene Epoch. For the last 11,000, 12,000 years, we're in a new age. And you can see that the CO2 levels at a high or above 420 parts per million, so as I mentioned, we're currently at 421, 22, and at a low of 280 parts per million. So imagine yourself at the beginning of the Holocene Epoch. If you close your eyes, what are the smells that you saw over here? What are the sounds that you are hearing? Look at the biodiversity on this planet. It was amazing. We were thriving with biodiversity. I wish I could be alive during this time and see waterfalls and see all the animal, plant life, insects that were alive during this time. At 280 parts per million, we were living in paradise. So since then, a lot has happened. So in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, and the CO2 concentration then was 280 parts per million. This means that Columbus got to live during paradise, right up there. Next, a couple hundred years later, we had the first Olympics, modern Olympics in Greece and Athens. And the CO2 concentration then had already begun rising because industrial activity had begun. Now, the Titanic in 1912, that's when the Titanic sank. And the CO2 concentration reached 300 parts per million for the very first time. And of course, another milestone, obviously, as beetles are formed, right? And the CO2 concentration was 315 parts per million then. Now, I know everyone's going to think this is the most important milestone. Yeah, Taylor Swift was born, 1989. And for the first time, we have surpassed 350 parts per million. But these are really important milestones in the history of our CO2 concentration. And as we move forward, when the iPhone was first released in 2008, we then see that the CO2 concentration was at 384 parts per million. And when we had COVID in 2020 during the pandemic, the CO2 concentration had already risen above 400 parts per million. Now, fast forward to 2023, the average was around 421 parts per million. If we think about the big ranges that we saw from the Precambrian era, the Mesozoic era, the Cenozoic era, and the times that we're living in now, this difference makes a huge, huge difference. And when we were at 280 parts per million at the beginning of the Holocene Epoch, we had, for the very first time, a stable climate, the last glacial period. And now we're seeing this wide fluctuation of even a few hundred parts per million, which make a difference. And just to kind of give you a sense, for the last 800,000 years, we have always been below 300 parts per million. But with industrial activity, led by human causes, we have surpassed 300 parts per million, and again, today we are at 422 plus or minus, depending on the seasons, of CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So globally, we now emit around 35 to 40 gigatons of CO2 annually. And I think many of you probably agree with me, we have not reached peak emissions. So we may even go higher than 35 to 40. But 20 gigatons of our emissions are naturally absorbed by our land and our oceans, and the remaining 20 gigatons accumulates in the atmosphere. So what that means is that when we put CO2 in the atmosphere, it stays there for a very long time. Some of you may be familiar with methane, which when it goes up, it doesn't stay there for as long as CO2. But everything we've kind of put up there, some of it is still there from the beginning of the industrial times, and it accumulates year over year over year. So we're just putting more and more, and it's not coming down fast enough. So you're kind of familiar with the numbers on the right, but I'm going to draw your attention to the numbers on the left. These are some key milestones that experts have carved out for us. So if we surpass 450 parts per million, we will surpass the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set by the Paris Agreement. And some experts say we've already long surpassed that. We need to be at 300 to 350 parts per million or below in order to have a thriving planet. So are we going to return to paradise on Earth? Are we going to return to the time when we had a stable planet where the CO2 concentration was 280 parts per million? I think that is the job of many of us in this room and what we're aiming towards. But it's important to keep in mind the numbers and the scale that we're working with. Because in order to get to 280 parts per million, we need gigaton scale of carbon removal, not only decarbonization. And when I say carbon removal, probably a tree grows in your head. Maybe some experts in the room are thinking of enhanced rough weathering or BECCS or direct air capture. But actually, our planet is 30% land and 70% ocean. And our ocean has over 3 mechanisms of cycling and storing carbon. So next time someone tells you about trees, or tells you about biochar, tell them, well, let's talk about ocean sabotage because it represents 70% of actual our carbon cycling. So with that, I invite you all to participate in this. So if you can scan the QR code, find out what the CO2 concentration was when you were born, because we all know Taylor Swift, 1989, what was it, 352 parts per billion. You also have the right to know what the CO2 concentration was when you were born. And if you want to upload your photo, you can make a little kind of profile photo like this, and you can use it on social media to share in a fun way. People curious, like, ooh, what does this mean? 341 parts per million. Like, maybe I should learn more about that. And the other thing that I would like you all to do, you have a long 2 weeks ahead of you. Maybe some of you are staying here for a couple of days for the entire 2 weeks. But I'd like you to think about this on the right-hand side. What will the CO2 concentration be at 2030? If we reach net zero, let's say we reach net zero today, we would still typically be at 421 parts per million. So how do we get down to paradise 280 parts per million or even 300? And I would love to hear what your guess is for what will be in 2030. So you're welcome to message me on LinkedIn or social media and tell me what you think. And I want to leave you with our kind of famous word at global carbon: what gets measured gets changed. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Michelle. I think everybody needs to make sure that they get out and have a look at the test carbon measurement at 124 that we have booked that way. Shall we?